All right, so part 2 of adding positives and negatives actually deals with subtraction. But before we get there, we've got to think about subtraction in an entirely different way. We're going to start off pretty simple, okay? So I want you to think about what number is opposite of positive 3. Think about a number line. Okay, if I got a number line here, I've got 0, 1, 2, 3. What number is opposite? So 3 is 1, 2, 3 away from 0 on the right side. So 3 away from 0 on the left would be -1, -2, -3. So the opposite of positive 3 is -3. Okay. So same idea here. What would be the opposite of -7? Well, the opposite of a negative number is a positive number. So the opposite of -7 is +7. Okay, the opposite of 1,312 would be -1,000, not equal, sorry, -1,312. The opposite of negative pi would be positive pi. So we can actually think of a subtraction symbol as opposites, and that's going to be key. Like I said in our last video, you can actually do math without ever subtracting at all, because instead of thinking of something as subtraction, you can think of it as opposite. So let's just start with a simple example. 5 minus 2. Now I'm hoping you know that the answer to this is 3. But instead of thinking of it as subtraction, we can think of subtraction as adding the opposite. So I can actually think of this as a +5 plus the opposite of 2. We're subtracting 2, so instead of subtracting, we're going to think of subtracting 2 as the opposite of 2. Well, the opposite of 2 is -2. And now we can think about our song. Different signs subtract. So 5 minus 2 is 3. The bigger number here is positive. So +5 plus a -2 is +3. So instead of subtracting, we added the opposite. Okay, that can be a little funky to get used to. But think of subtraction as an opposite sign. 5 minus 2 is the same thing as 5 plus the opposite of 2, which is -2. Okay, so let's do another one. -7 minus 5. So instead of subtracting, we're going to add the opposite. So think of this as two numbers, -7 and a -5. So instead of subtracting, we're going to add opposites. We're going to say -7 plus the opposite of 5, which is -5. So instead of -7 minus 5, we're going to have -7 plus the opposite of 5, which is -5. So sing the song in your heads. Same signs, add and keep. 7 plus 5 is 12. They have the same sign, so we're going to keep the sign, which is negative. So -7 plus a -5 is -12. Therefore, -7 minus 5 is also -12. So instead of subtracting, you add the opposite. Okay, let's get to a weirder example. And this is where it gets a little complicated, so stay with me. Let's say we've got 5 minus a -2. This one looks really weird. Okay, so instead of subtracting, we're going to add the opposite of the second number. So 5 will just stay +5. But instead of subtracting, I'm going to change the subtraction symbol to an addition symbol. Instead of subtracting -2, I'm going to add the opposite of -2. The opposite of -2 is +2. So it looks super funky, but 5 minus -2 actually turns into positive 5 plus positive 2, which is positive 7. Instead of subtracting, turn your subtraction to an addition symbol and add the opposite of your number. So 5 minus negative 2 turns into positive 5 plus the opposite of negative 2, which is positive 2. So it's weird. When you subtract a negative, you actually add a positive because you're adding the opposite. So when you subtract, you can turn it to addition by adding the opposite. So let's just do one more. Let's say negative 8 minus a negative 3. Okay? So keep the first number the same. So we're going to just leave this as negative 8. But instead of subtracting, we're going to add the opposite. So change your subtraction to addition and add the opposite of your second number. The opposite of negative 3 is positive 3. So instead of subtracting negative 3, we're going to add a positive 3. Now we have different signs subtract. 8 minus 3 is 5. The bigger number here is our negative, so our answer is actually negative 5. So again, a little funky, but instead of subtracting, you can actually add the opposite of the number. It's how you can get away with never subtracting in math.